Hello to our friends joining us via recording. Today is our last review session before the lab final exam. Friendly reminder that exam is open right now. It is open until tomorrow night at 11:59 p.m. Please make sure to have completed the exam before 11:59 p.m. Otherwise, you will not see your score when you finish, and I'll have to go in and accept it. So make sure you start no later than about 10:30 Tuesday night to make sure you can get it done in time. For today's session, one of the things that we talked about wanting to review was muscles of the body. So we're going to use an activity that we had actually worked on before. We did this one together in a group. This time we'll label it together as a class to go through. We'll probably name more than just the muscles on this list, just because the more we review, the better off we are. So let's start. Let's see, we've got several muscles here on the list. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start pointing to various places, and I'm going to ask you if you want to type the whole name, you can, but it's probably easier to just type a number into the chat. So let's do some simple basic ones together. So let's start up here in the chest. When we talk about the big muscle that we find in the chest, who do we call this muscle? What's this one called? Yeah, there we go. Several votes for muscle number 11. This is my muscle called the pectoralis major muscle. It's found here, the big one on the chest. Right next door to it, totally fine, Elapina, right next door to it is the one that Elapina mentioned, the other one a big one that helps us to move the shoulder, which is the deltoid up top. Since we're kind of on a roll with the arm, let's go this direction. When I'm looking at my picture right here, this is the muscle that you find on the front side of your arm, or it's the one when you're flexing your muscles off to the side that we're showing off here. Yeah, so this one here is Biceps Brachii. Biceps Brachii. I'm just going to put biceps for the time being. Biceps Brachii. I'll mention for us, because we should be able to see it on the other side as well, there's my other version of biceps, the one that's in your arms. Biceps Brachii. Since we already labeled deltoid, I'll go ahead and label that one on this side too. Then we go down into some of our lesser favorite muscles. And so let's start with, oops, let me get my pointer here. I didn't ask you to label this one on the list up here. This one that I just put a line on is the one that goes down into the hands. This was the one on the back side when we talked about muscles that I told you this is your reference point to the middle or to the two sides. Yeah, so right now we are on the back side of the arm, and the back side of the arm here is where we find the extensors. So this is my middle muscle that's on the back side of the arm. This particular one is Extensor Digitorum. So it goes down into the digits. This was the one, remember I told you, and we'll pull up those pictures that are a little bit clearer than this. On the back side of the arm, the one that we're always referencing to, we're always looking for, is Extensor Digitorum. We can only kind of see it, but if you squint a little bit on the front side, see how I can see this long tendon right here? This long tendon goes into the palm of the hand. That's the one, yeah, like Kira mentioned, this is the one right here that we would call Palmaris Longus. Now, I want to be abundantly clear that if I'm asking you about Palmaris Longus or Extensor Digitorum or our other extensors or flexors, I'm going to not use this big picture for that. I'm going to use the special picture that you have in the lesson number, I think it's 10 packet that we were talking about. So I just am mentioning it here on the big one. Since we're looking at it, we will go through and look up close. because up close, those views that you have in that lab packet are what we would actually use on the exam. So extensor digitorum on the back side of the arm. Extensor digitorum, a little bit hard to see up here, but I'll mention you can see those tendons that go down into the fingers. If I were to guess, and again, I'm not going to use this on the exam, but I would suspect that this is extensor digitorum right here. We'll use a much better view for that one. We also have, so if this is extensor digitorum, this is my muscle that I would say is labeled on the radius side. So when we're on the back side of the arm, remember that the back side of the arm has the extensors. Yeah, so this one that's next door to extensor digitorum, the one that's right next door, it has a really long name. I'm going to type the whole name for you. Extensor digitorum radialis. No, extensor carp. Ignore Dr. Ollis. I have not had my afternoon coffee. Extensor carpi radialis. Is someone more awake than me? That is correct, right? That's what that muscle is called. Yeah, Caitlin's like, I'm glad I'm not the only one talking that way. Yeah, for sure. Not enough coffee, too many current events papers bouncing around in my mind. Several of you picked the article about how an unfinished task like drives you crazy, right? I'm not sure if anyone here picked that article. Yeah, I have read many versions of that article from all of you. So yeah, so look at this. We got 2 people in class today that picked that article. So I think I read it at least probably 10 times. So that was a very popular article in this unit. I got all kinds of stuff bouncing around in my mind. Yeah, fair point, Kara. I have graded half of the submissions, so I've probably got about another 10 versions of that article to go. Great fun. I don't know how to say it, the Ziggurat effect, something like that. All right, extensor digitorum, the big one in the middle of the back of the arm. Extensor carpi radialis, the one on the radius side. We cannot see extensor carpi ulnaris, that would be the one on the other side of extensor digitorum. So the 3 big ones on the back of the arm, it's always the extensors. This back side of your arm, and if you feel it on yourself too, 100% I recommend literally touch it on yourself to get the touch sensations together. The extensors are on the back side of the arm. Palmaris longus is on the front side, and then we have the flexors that are on either side of that. So flexors on the palm side, extensors on the back side. Next to extensor carpi radialis, by the way, there's one other muscle that we learned, and that one other muscle that we learned is brachioradialis. Brachioradialis. So that's on top of, if you will, extensor carpi radialis. That one goes from the arm down toward the radius, brachioradialis. We'll look at these up close a little bit bigger. I'm going to move us over into the abdomen. So we did pectoralis major, which is the big chest muscle. Then we've got our muscle right here that goes up and down, the 6-pack muscle. What number is the name of the 6-pack muscle? Who's this here? Or you can type its name if you're really fast. Yeah, several of us either typed it or gave me that number. This big muscle that goes up and down, that goes parallel to the vertebral column, is called rectus abdominis. So rectus, the muscle that goes up and down here. Next to it, on the outside, the outermost layer that we see here on the abdomen is called the external obliques. The external obliques. Those are the only 2 muscles that you can see in the abdominal area from the outside, the external obliques and the rectus abdominis. The internal obliques are right underneath these. So when you're looking at that model that we covered way back in like lesson number 7, there you can see the internal obliques right underneath the externals. And then you see on the very inside of that abdominal model, you can see the transversus abdominis muscles that go across. Those are the deepest muscles of the abdominal cavity. That brings us down into the leg. So we've got rectus abdominis that goes up and down in the abdominal area. And then we've got rectus femoris, which is my primary muscle that runs up and down along the femur. So rectus femoris, rectus femoris. Next to it are the 2 muscles that their name literally means they're big. So one of them is the big one on the outside. The big one on the outside, yeah, vastus lateralis, because it's lateral toward the outside. The big one on the inside called vastus medialis. It's those directional terms back to haunt us way back from week number 1, those directional terms back. We also see in the very middle of the leg, the triangle-shaped group up here. These are muscles, yep, called the adductors or the adductor group. So that's these ones. Let me move that a little bit closer. The triangle ones in the middle. Remember from our discussion of muscles that the adductors are named based on what they do. So these are muscles that do adduction. They pull things toward the middle of the body. I kind of covered up a long, skinny muscle that's here in the very middle of the thigh. Yeah, so that long, skinny muscle in the very middle of the thigh is a muscle called gracilis. Gracilis, it's long and graceful, if you will, here in the medial thigh. This one, just like rectus, is going to be one that looks like it runs kind of parallel to the femur. So the gracilis muscle here, the adductors next to it, and then we've got this crisscross muscle that goes all the way from the outside toward the inside. This is my long muscle that I see here called Sartorius. Yeah, absolutely, Sartorius. So Sartorius is one of my muscles. It crisscrosses. We talked a little bit before in our movement discussion about how you have origins and insertions of muscles. When I talk about the origin and the insertion of a muscle, which of those is the attachment site that doesn't move when a muscle contracts? Is it the origin or the insertion that does not move when a muscle contracts? Yeah, exactly. So the origin is the one that does not move when a muscle contracts. When we think about Sartorius, its origin is up here on the hip. Its insertion is down here, down by the knee. When this muscle contracts, remember, yeah, exactly like Kaylin said, the insertion is always going to move toward the origin. So this is going to be a muscle, just like all of its friends here on the top of the thigh. This is going to be a muscle that when it contracts, one of the things it does is it pulls the leg up. This is going to be a muscle that assists with flexion. Remember, my muscles that live on top of the thigh, they flex the thigh at the hip joint. Here's my origin. This part is going to move up to get toward it. So this is a muscle that assists us with flexion, along with, like I said, its friends here on the top. When I'm a muscle that's on the back side, these are my muscles that do extension at the hip joint. So let's label some of these muscles that help me with extension back here. So let's start with the big one, What's the name of the big one that we find in the gluteal region? Gluteal region. Yeah, exactly. It's my big one. So it's called gluteus maximus. Gluteus maximus, the big one in the gluteal region. You can see a little bit in the pink, gluteus medius, my medium-sized one, gluteus medius. So I see that up here in this light pink color. You can see it over here in light pink. You can kind of see it a little bit right here, but again, this is not the best view of it, so this is not where I'm going to tag it on the exam. That would be mean. I am mean, but I'm not that mean. So we're going to use this area here where you can see it next door to gluteus maximus. There's gluteus medius up there. Then we come down here. This is my muscle that is lateral on the back side of the thigh. It also has 2 attachment sites. Yeah, so this one back here that's on the lateral thigh, side of the back of the thigh, that is biceps femoris. Biceps femoris. Hey, here's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I believe on the exam, when you're trying to name a muscle, we'll put an arrow to one of these muscles, and we'll give you a drop-down menu of a muscle to select. I'm pretty sure that it's going to have the names of almost every muscle. So just make sure to take your time, double check yourself. Don't accidentally give me biceps brachii for this one. Make sure to take your time. Make sure you select biceps femoris, not biceps brachii. That's a big idea overall with the exam, right? Take your time, read your answers, just check. I would hate for you to accidentally click the wrong one for me. So biceps femoris versus biceps brachii. We saw that here. We saw that up here, the 2 types of biceps. Who lives next door on the back side of the thigh back here? Yeah, exactly. So next door, we have a muscle called semitendinosus, and I kind of started its name on top of it. Semitendinosus, that's the muscle that's medial on the thigh. Biceps femoris is lateral on the thigh. Yeah, exactly. Like Kaylin said, a good pointer for femoris, that's the one that's on the femur, right? So we want to say that the one on the femur is femoris. Brachii is like that brachial region. So we wouldn't want to say that the arm biceps, the one that's in the brachial region, is found in the leg. Just like we wouldn't want to say that the femoris muscle is anywhere except by the femur. So absolutely use those hints in their name, because that's where they came from, the locations of these muscles. All right, let's go down here into the back of the leg. The back of the leg down here. Exactly, yep, that's another one with a long name. This one is called gastrocnemius. Gastrocnemius. The job of gastrocnemius that lives here on the back side of the leg, this is a muscle that does what we call plantar flexion. Plantar flexion. So that means that it takes the sole of your feet and it pushes them toward the ground, toward the plantar region. If you live on the back side of the leg down here, you do plantar flexion. You push the feet toward the ground. Yes, standing on your tiptoes, absolutely. If we live on the front side of the leg, like we see over here, these are ones that do what's called dorsiflexion, where the foot moves toward the dorsal part of the body. So the back side of you is your dorsal side. If I contract muscles that live here, they're going to pull on the feet and they're going to lift up your foot, kind of like rocking you back on your heels. So if you live on the front, you do dorsiflexion because you pull this part backwards toward the back of the body. If you live here, you pull on the foot and the foot pushes into the ground. It does plantar flexion. So dorsiflexion if you're on the front, plantar flexion if you're on the back. A couple other muscles that we should label. So we labeled gastrocnemius. Just in front of gastrocnemius is a muscle that we can see there. I'm going to put a little star on it on the other side here. The one that's right next to gastrocnemius, yep, is one called soleus. Soleus. So these ones are right next to each other or right on top of each other. Then we have a muscle that I can see right here, and I can also see it over here because he's turning all funny here. Yeah, so this muscle, you'll see it called two different things. It's the same muscle. The name that I like for it, because it tells me where I find it, is Fibularis Longus. Fibularis Longus on top of the fibula. You will also see it though if you do a Google search. You know how much Dr. Ellis loves Google, right? This muscle is also called Palmaris Longus when you're looking at Google images. Some of them will call it that. Oh, you're right. I'm so sorry, Audrey. I put that over too far. You're totally right. Yep, so Audrey corrected me. Palmaris is a little bit more on the outside because we actually have two different ones that are here on the front side. Yeah, I apologize. I got overly excited. We've got, so let's start with the one that Dr. Ellis forgot about, which is why I put things in the wrong place. This is my one that we have right on front of the tibia. Who lives right on front of the tibia? Who's there on the front? Yeah, exactly. So Tibialis Anterior. Tibialis Anterior, my one that I have right on the front of the tibia. Next to it, we have one that goes down into the foot that has the same name as one that goes down into the hand. So my one that I erroneously labeled before, apologies on that, is my Extensor Digitorum, and I believe it's longus. Is that correct? When we're down, yeah, when we're down in the foot, the way we distinguish between them, we call it Extensor Digitorum longus because it's long when we're down in the foot. So Extensor Digitorum longus goes down into the toes, just like Extensor Digitorum goes into the fingers up higher. Tibialis Anterior on the front, then we have Fibularis on the outside. We can see it much better over here though. There's Fibularis much better. And then Soleus and Gastrocnemius. That leaves for us my muscles of the back. So let's start with the big one. What's the name of that big kite-shaped one? I hope we all know this one. Yeah, exactly. The really big one that spans most of your back, called trapezius. Yep, muscle number 18, trapezius. So trapezius, my big one that I see here. Underneath it, we have another big one. This one's kind of diamond-shaped as well. What's this big one that I see down here? Yeah, exactly. So this big one here is Latissimus Dorsi. Latissimus Dorsi actually goes up and it attaches to the humerus. So when we're thinking about actions of Latissimus Dorsi, one of the things that Latissimus Dorsi does is it actually pulls the arm back down because it's attached to the arm up here. The name of the movement when I pull a limb toward the middle of the body, what did I call that when I move something toward the middle? Yeah, exactly. When things come toward the middle, that's adduction. So Latissimus Dorsi, it's attached here in the middle of the body and it goes up and attaches to the humerus. That's going to pull it toward the middle. This is going to be an important adductor where it's pulling it back toward the middle of the body. Just like those adductors that we talked about here in the leg. They're found on the medial side and they're pulling it in. So if you attach to the medial side of a bone, because latissimus goes up and attaches underneath here, When it pulls that bone down and toward the middle. The deltoid is actually an opposite. See how the deltoid attaches here on the lateral portion of the bone? That means the deltoid, when it contracts, is going to pull the humerus up or pull it away from the midline of the body. So the deltoid is going to be an important abductor, whereas latissimus is going to be an important adductor. All right, y'all, I'm going to mess it up again because you know how Dr. Alice didn't do her long-term memory for talking about some of these things before? I need you to help me out. Let's start with the one that I just put an arrow on. Who did I just put an arrow on? Yeah, so we got teres over here. So we'll start with teres because a couple of us jumped on teres. Teres major is my muscle that I see over here. It's my small muscle that's extending up in a line. Yep, and then my other one that I see here in pink that I'm pointing to is a muscle called infraspinatus. Infraspinatus. It gets its name because it is inferior to the spine of the scapula. So infraspinatus, the spine of the scapula would be about right here. Well, actually, we can see part of it right here too. So infraspinatus and the teres major. We didn't make you learn it, but teres minor would be right up in this area as well. I think the couple more muscles that I'm realizing I missed here. There is this one. You can also see it better over here. This one has a long name, right? Kira's just showing off, right? Type it up real fast. No, you're good. Sterno, Collido, Mastoid. That's the one, remember, that attaches to the sternum, the clavicle, and the mastoid process. I'm totally going to abbreviate and just call it SCM, exactly, like Kaylin. We're channeling the same brainwaves here. So sternocleidomastoid. It attaches to the mastoid process on the temporal bone, so we can see that really well, that attachment site. And then you can see the sternum and the clavicle attachment sites here too. I probably wouldn't use Muscle Man to do these muscles, but we can still see them here. So how about this one right here that you see on your forehead? It's named after the bone it's on top of. Yeah, exactly. So the frontalis is the one on the frontal bone. We also have another one on the side of your head that's named after its bone. That's temporalis. I'm not going to take the time to label all the little tiny facial muscles on here because it's small, but I'll point out. We've got the circle one around the eyeball that's called Orbicularis Oculi. Oculi for eye. And then we've got a circle one around the mouth. That's Orbicularis oris. It's really tough. You can kind of make out right here a muscle called zygomaticus major. You can see that much better when we are on that big model of the head with the facial muscles. So that's the one that we'd use. We've also got a muscle right here that's on top of the mandible called the masseter. So some of those facial muscles, much easier to see when we're talking about that big model of the facial muscles. Okay, so Kira mentioned there that we also had to learn, I was seeing it and I was wondering if we'd asked you about that. The other muscle that we asked you to learn is, see this little one that's peeking right there? So I'm going to draw a line over here. That is a muscle that's called Serratus Anterior. Serratus Anterior. So that is a muscle that kind of looks like a serrated knife, and it reaches around toward the front side of the body. So Serratus Anterior, we actually, I think, learned that one mostly on that special abdomen model that had all of the different abdominal muscles on it. You can see serratus really clearly on that one, but you can kind of see it peeking right here as well. Serratus anterior. How do we feel about muscle IDs? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Dance party? Dancing out those muscles? Okay, yep, so tensor fasciae latae, the other one that we had to learn. So tensor fasciae latae, I guess we can see it. Yeah, so I'm going to do Palmaris Longus. I'm going to pull up the arm one here in a minute. Correct me if I am wrong. Did I just draw a line on tensor fasciae latae? Okay, yeah, so that one, I'm going to be honest, it's not my favorite. Has a fun name, but it's not my favorite. So tensor fasciae latae, it's attached to the stuff called the fascia latae, which is all of, you can see the fascia latae best right here. So see the white connective tissue on the outside of the leg, and kind of see it right here as well, that white connective tissue. So tensor fasciae latae is the little tiny muscle that tenses the fascia that we find right here. So tensor fasciae latae, I'll type it up for my friends who are watching on the recording. Tensor fasciae latae. That's what its name is. Put a box around it. Means that I tense, or I squeeze the connective tissue, fascia, that's on the lateral side. Tensor fasciae latae. Really fast. So I don't think we asked you to identify semimembranosus. We did ask you to predict its action. I'll label it. Yeah, so semimembranosus, I'm going to circle it right there. I'm going to change the color so you can see it a little better. Semimembranosus lives right next door to semitendinosus. So it's the little tiny muscle in there, which is why we don't usually ask you to identify it, just because it's hard to see. It's right next door, kind of almost embedded inside of semitendinosus. So the little muscle here, semitendinosus, the big one we're knowing next door to biceps femoris. Let me go to the pictures of the arm that are more up close so we can review those arm muscles a little bit more in depth. These are everyone's favorites, right? I say that completely jokingly because I know that we don't love this. But we'll review it together so that when it shows up on the exam, we have seen it time and time again. So we are looking at the anterior side of the arm, because see, here's the palm of your hand. This is the stuff that would be on the front side of your forearm. Every time when we look at the forearm from the front side, we are always wanting to start with this one right here, the one that goes down into the palm of your hand. That's your reference point. So this one here that goes down into the palm of the hand, this is the one called Palmaris Longus. Exactly, Palmaris Longus, because it goes into the palm of the hand. We always want to start with that one because when we are looking for the names of our other muscles, we're always referring to which side of Palmaris Longus you're on. Are you on the thumb side or are you on the pinky side? If I'm on the pinky side, which bone in the forearm here am I on top of, or am I closer to, if you're on the pinky side? Yeah, exactly. So your pinky side, remember that your ulna is on the pinky side. Your lateral side has up going on, right? The ulna and the pinky. So this muscle here, when we're on the front side of the forearm, this muscle is a flexor muscle. If you live on the front of the forearm, you're a flexor. So this is flexor carpi, because we're going into the carpal region. Flexor carpi ulnaris. I flex the carpal bones on the ulna side. If I go to the other side of Palmaris Longus, it's still a flexor, it's still carpi, but now we're on the radius side. So now I'm flexor carpi radialis. So we always find Palmaris Longus to refer to flexor carpi radialis on the thumb side, or flexor carpi ulnaris on the ulna side. On this image, we can also see Biceps Brachii. That's here more toward the anterior side of the body. And we can also see Triceps Brachii. Triceps Brachii. I like your fun fact, Kira, that people are losing Palmaris Longus. For the sake of our anatomy class, we will make sure that all of our models still have that muscle, since it's our reference point, right? That would be a little bit sad if we gave you a model that had evolved past Palmaris Longus. I think when you read up on the technical action of what Palmaris Longus does, it's like it somehow flexes the skin of the palm or something, like tenses the palm. Yeah, it's not something that we really do per se. So it would make sense that we're not really using that muscle very much over time. Remember, we talked about use it or lose it. If we're not using it for generation after generation, we just may not need it anymore, especially with all of our typing, right? We're not even writing as much as we used to. So I wonder what all we're going to lose over time with our technology-driven lives, right? Yeah, that would make sense that you could use this tendon to replace others. Yeah. All right, front side, anterior side, maybe not quite as tricky. Let's go to the, oh, here, let me mention something. Sorry, really fast. Look how clearly you can see right here. There's that serratus anterior, by the way. So we can see it reaching around toward the front side of the body, and you can see those really good teeth, just like on a serrated knife. So there's serratus anterior. You can see it actually really nicely on this picture here. This is the side we all hate, right? When we're looking at it from the back side. Remember that on the back side, we're always looking for extensor digitorum. That's where we always start. That's the one that goes down into the digits in the hand. So extensor digitorum, that's the first one you always want to reference to. Again, we're on the back side. When we're on the back side, we're an extensor. So that means that when I've got my extensor, you can't really see, let me get my two other ones there. So extensor carpi ulnaris on the pinky side next to extensor digitorum. I suppose we can all put a little line to the other place, kind of where it starts. Extensor carpi ulnaris. Then we've got extensor carpi radialis. That's on the other side of extensor digitorum. Can't spell radialis, I apologize. And we have that one other muscle that we talked about before. I'm going to put a little box around it. That muscle that goes from the arm down into the forearm, that's brachioradialis. Brachioradialis. So again, when you're trying to decipher and you're on the exam, you're trying to figure out who we're pointing to, always start with finding extensor digitorum. Maybe I'll be pointing to extensor digitorum. That'd be awesome. Or maybe I'm pointing right next door to it on the thumb side, or right next door to it on the pinky side. Or maybe I'm not pointing right next door to it at all. Maybe I'm pointing to something that's a little bit farther away from extensor digitorum. We always want to refer back to where extensor digitorum is. So where that tendon is that goes down into the hands. Extensor digitorum. Any other muscles that we want to make sure we point out on here? Are we okay with these ones? Okay, well, I know I had some questions about origin, insertion, action type stuff, making predictions, because that's going to be part of the exam. We can use this lab packet to help us out with that, because there were several different origin and insertion activities in this packet here. Oh my. Kaylin's chat is freaking out. If your question actually comes through, Kaylin, I'd be happy to answer. I got like 50 versions of random question. Okay, I'm not the only one. Audrey's laughing at the random question repeating itself. While Kaylin's typing her question, can you all tell me which page we're at in the lab packet when we start doing those origin and insertion activities? What page are we at? Maybe we don't have the packets in front of us. Okay, page 11. Perfect. So we're in lab packet number 10. We are on page 11 is where we start asking you to make these predictions. So we're going to work through some of these activities together. We're going to work on it specifically for arm muscles. But here is a wink, wink, nudge, nudge that we do need to be able to do this kind of thing on the exam. We practiced a little bit for exactly how we'll have to do this on the exam during that muscle actions review session that we did last week. So think about going back to that to help you figure out how this kind of activity will be when you're taking the exam. Kaylin's question is about whether or not we can continue to do the review assignments. So those assignments are technically closed because their due date is past. I will get in touch with the lab coordinator and see what she thinks about the possibility of opening it up for no more credit, but for the chance to review. Yeah, so I'll check with her and see, since it is the same, since we run the same course, every single person who takes the lab has the same course policies. That's why it closed yesterday as opposed to our normal time. So let me chat with her and see if we can get it opened up again for practice. But the scores are set since our lab homework is due on Sunday. But I'll look into that for you, Kaylin. All right. When we are taking the exam, I will give you a picture of a muscle and I will show you on a skeleton where its origin is and where its insertion is, and I will ask you to tell me what it does. We're looking at specific origins and insertions for muscles in this activity so that we can get some practice with where our bone markings are. But on the exam, I'm not going to give you a blank skeleton and give you this kind of detail. I'm going to give you a skeleton that has a muscle drawn on it for you to make predictions on. All right, so let's draw this picture for ourselves together, and then we'll make a prediction. My internet totally just died, but it came back. So I'm hoping that it stays back. I apologize about that. Did we all lose our minds when Dr. Ollis dropped out? Yeah, it looks like it's still recording, actually. So for my friends who are watching, they're going to be a little bit sad that they have that dead zone in there. So apologies on that. I completely lost internet. I was about ready to try to start hotspotting it, but I'm glad that my internet apparently came back on. Yeah, I think the chat is not included in the videos. I think that if we watched the video in Blackboard itself, we could go back and see the chat. So I could always go back and watch you, but I won't. But I could. Yeah, so you don't have to worry about whatever you said in the chat when Dr. Ollis disappeared on you. You're all good. What we were trying to do before I lost internet there for a moment and abandoned you, yeah, when you were thinking you were going to need therapy, I came back to help you out. What we were trying to do is we were trying to practice using origins and insertions to predict how a muscle moves. So this activity in your packet helps us to remember the location of things. Let's start with our origin. Hey, before I do, remind me, when a muscle contracts, we do or don't move the origin. What happens when a muscle contracts? We do or don't move that origin. Yeah, so this is my place that I'm not going to move. My origin is that place where I don't move. So we're going to color our origin blue. My origin, notice, is listed as the lateral epicondyle on the humerus. When we talk about the humerus, remember that it has both a lateral and a medial epicondyle. Those are my two bumps. You can actually feel these at your elbow joint. These are the two bumps that are up higher. So the lateral epicondyle is on the lateral side. The medial epicondyle is on the medial side. We're talking about the lateral epicondyle. So we're talking about the bump over here. Now, this muscle technically inserts on the ridge up above it, but we would need to know where the lateral epicondyle was. It's over here. So I'm going to draw myself a little line. Here's my first place that brachioradialis attaches to, is out here. My insertion of brachioradialis, which is the place that's going to move, my insertion is the styloid process of the radius. The styloid process of the radius. The styloid process is a bone marking we have on the radius and the ulna. When we're talking about the one on the radius, that's my little bone marking down here. And if you bend your wrist back, you might be able to feel its general location, kind of between where your thumb is and where you start to feel your arm. The styloid process of the radius down here. We also have a styloid process on the ulna that we find down here at the bottom on the other side. So let's get out our green here. My green is the insertion, and it's down here, the styloid process on the radius. Now that I've drawn my two attachment sites, we're going to connect the dots. This is the most fun part of this activity. I have drawn a muscle that attaches at these two locations. When this muscle contracts, the green dot moves toward the blue dot. The insertion moves toward the origin. So when you've got a picture like this on the exam, I'm reminding you again, 100%, I think that you should touch on your body the two locations where these attachment sites are, and then move them together. So I promise no one's watching you. Proctorio's not watching you right now, right? And I won't watch the Proctorio recording. So put your arm out, feel that green dot, the location where that green dot is just above your thumb, And then feel up on the humerus where we have that blue dot that's up higher. When I move that place you felt by your thumb closer to that place we felt on our elbow, are we making our angle bigger or smaller between our bones when this green dot moves toward this blue dot? Yeah, I'm making my angle smaller, right? So when we're using this kind of terminology, we would say we're decreasing the angle. We're making those bones come closer together. We're decreasing the angle. But hey, you know what the easy anatomy word for decreasing the angle is? The easy word is flexus. Yeah, we're doing flexion. There are two ways to say the exact same thing for what brachioradialis does. One way to say what it does is it decreases the angle, or it's bringing our bones closer together, decreases the angle. The other way with your movement words, the movement words, by the way, that you were memorizing those rules for to help you make predictions, the rule that we said was if you live on the front side, you are a flexor. When we were talking about the arm, remember anything on the arm? If you live on the front side, you're a flexor. So we could have, once we drew this muscle, even without acting it out, we could have used our rule to tell us this is a front side muscle. That means it's a flexor. You could make those kinds of predictions on the exam as well. If I draw you something like that we're on the front side, that's a flexor. Now that's true of the arm, right? It got a little dicey in the leg. We'll pull up a skeleton and talk about that. But this is a muscle, because it's on the front, it's a flexor. Or like we just did together, or at least I hope you did it, because I legit 100% did. When I touched my bone marking, my styloid process on my radius, when I brought that closer to the lateral epicondyle, I saw that those bones got closer together. I did flexion. So we just made a prediction based on a picture. And we drew this picture using those bone markings. Let's do another one. Now we're going to talk about Palmaris Longus. Ironically, that one that we might be getting rid of, right? Well, by golly, we're going to predict its action. Even though we might be losing this muscle, we're going to predict what's going on with Palmaris. When we talk about Palmaris Longus with its origin, its non-moving site, hey, look, now we're on the opposite epicondyle of the humerus. So the medial epicondyle of the humerus is my bump over here. Palmaris Longus starts over here, my bump over here. My insertion is the connective tissue that's right on top of the metacarpals. Now, obviously, this is a skeleton, so I don't have connective tissue on it, but I can see my metacarpals. So I'm going to draw for myself attachment sites that are here on those metacarpals. The metacarpals are the ones in the palm, remember, where the carpals meet with the phalanges. So I've got my origin up here, my non-moving attachment site, and I've got my insertion down here. We're going to do some connect the dots. Again, I've got a muscle that's on the front side of the arm. So you could just completely ignore acting this out, and we could predict, because we're on the front, that we're a flexor. We decrease the angle. Or, much more fun, you could actually do the movement, right? So if you touch the palm of your hand, you touch your medial epicondyle. Now we're on the other side of the humerus. When I'm bringing together my palm toward my elbow, essentially, that is flexion. We're decreasing the angle. So if I gave you a picture without these words, if I gave you this picture, you would need to be able to act out this movement to predict, oh yeah, this is coming closer to this. And when it comes closer together, I call that flexion, or I'm decreasing the angle that I see at the joint. Kaylin's asking what angle at the wrist. So when you're standing in anatomical position, remember that your palms are facing forward. They're straight forward. Your fingers are pointing straight down. So when I contract this muscle, the distance between the palm of my hand and the radius and the ulna, that distance gets smaller. Or the angle between the metacarpal bones that were pointing straight down becomes smaller relative to the radius and the ulna. Yeah, so when we talk about the angle, you can kind of ignore the angle word. You could even can just change it to, in our mind, we could change it to the distance between the bones. Does the distance decrease? Does the distance increase? That's the same thing when it talks about the angle. So the angle or the distance between my bones here in the wrist and my bones here in the arm. Yeah, and so Kaylin does bring up a good point. What we have to remember when you're predicting these actions, think about anatomical position. So think about when the body is, you're standing straight up, your palms are facing forward, your head's facing forward. When we start to use some of these words like flexion and extension, always use that kind of as a reference point for you. Does it look like we're moving closer together or farther away from anatomical position? Hey, so Palmaris longus is a muscle on the front side of the arm that does flexion. When we talked about antagonists, remember that antagonists typically are found on the opposite side of the body, and they're going to do the opposite action. Does anyone happen to remember what's the name of the muscle on the back side of the arm that I told you was your reference point for all those other ones on the back side of the arm? Yeah, exactly. Extensor digitorum. Extensor digitorum. This is the antagonist to Palmaris longus. It lives on the opposite side of the forearm, and it does an opposite function. That makes it the antagonist. So let me see. I guess I don't have any pictures that show the back side of the arm, but we could do the exact same thing like we did with Palmaris. We could find those bone markings on the back side of the arm that are the locations of extensor digitorum. That time, when we're thinking about extensor digitorum, so feel with me, since I don't have a way to draw it, we're going to pretend that extensor digitorum, its origin is the thing on the top of the ulna called the olecranon. Remember that the olecranon of the ulna, it's kind of a little C-shaped hook. It's in the back of your elbow. So we've got the olecranon as one attachment site, the origin. And we'll say that the back side of the metacarpals is my other attachment site. When I move the back side of my metacarpals, my palms, so the back side of my palm, toward my elbow, toward my olecranon, if you're doing that with me, because I'm literally over here doing this, if you're doing that with me, you'll notice that your palm moves backwards. And now we're going farther away. We're pulling the palm of the hand farther away from the radius and the ulna. We would say that extensor digitorum increases the angle at the joint because it's pulling apart the palm or the carpal bones from the radius and the ulna. So my antagonist lives on the opposite side. It does the opposite function. It's going to be an extensor. Extensors and flexors, always opposite of each other, always antagonist. So Caitlin asked if there could be more than one answer that's correct for this. Absolutely, because she also pointed out we do have some other muscles that are in the forearm that would be correct as well. So extensor, carpi, radialis, and I'm going to include ulnaris as well. Those would be other options too. Anybody who lives on the backside, for the sake of our class, the way that we're learning things, we would say that any of those extensor muscles would 100% be right. Yeah. Because Palmaris longus is a flexor. So anybody who does extension, anybody on the backside, would be considered an antagonist. Yeah, no, you're good, Kaylin. Yeah, absolutely. That's totally right. Let me see what other one. Okay, so the last one that we have here is flexor carpi radialis. When we talk about flexor carpi radialis and also flexor carpi ulnaris, the other thing that we're talking about these muscles doing is pulling things away from the midline or pulling things toward the midline. When we talked about pulling things away from the midline of the body, what was our word for that? When I move a body part away from the midline. Yeah, exactly. So now we're making a prediction about whether we're doing abduction or whether we're doing adduction. That's the description of what these movements are. So let's start here with our origin, our non-moving site. Our origin is the medial epicondyle of the humerus. So I'm going to draw my origin here. The medial epicondyle. We're here on the medial side. My insertion is on metacarpals 2 and 3. So my insertion is over here, 2 and 3. We're going to do some connect the dots here. Now, notice when I'm looking at my insertion, it is lateral to my origin. It's more toward the outside compared to my origin. That means that the shortest distance that I can contract this muscle, I would actually pull myself laterally. I'm a little bit closer if I try to move this way. I'm going to pull laterally. So put your hand out for me and move your metacarpal bones here toward your humerus laterally. So we're essentially waving up. So your thumb goes up in the air. When my thumb goes up in the air, would I call that abduction or adduction? When I move my hand like this, when we're going this way. Yeah, exactly. This is going to be one that's an abductor. It's an abductor. Because when I move this insertion toward this origin, I'm going to move up. I'm going to go this direction. When we talked about Palmaris longus, that connected across all of here, that's going to be one that moved us at the wrist joint, flexed us. This one, because it's off center, is going to pull us up, or it's going to abduct us. If instead of doing flexor carpi radialis, if we had instead done flexor carpi ulnaris, that one is on the ulna side, and that one, when we tried to pull those things together, would actually do adduction. These two, when we're talking about abduction and adduction, these two are actually opposites. So flexor carpi radialis, because it's on the radius side, because it's lateral things do abduction. When we talk about flexor carpi ulnaris, because it's on the ulna side, it's medial, that's going to do adduction. Yeah, so our fancy word for these two muscles, flexor carpi radialis and flexor carpi ulnaris, we would call those antagonists. Absolutely. When we're thinking about abduction versus adduction. Yeah, we would call them antagonists. Audrey asked if we will be asking about antagonists on the exam. I'm going to be honest, I can't recall if we do or don't ask that specific question. What I would say is if you are aware of who lives on the front side of the body and who lives on the back side of the body, I'm fairly certain that you would be able to answer that question. So if we do ask a question like that, like I said, I cannot remember if we do or not. If we do, as long as you know where things are located, it's just somebody on the opposite side. So you should be good. Hey, so let me see. Did I have a full skeleton for any of these? No. What I would like to do is remind us of what things will look like on the exam. So we did a little bit of this work together when we did our muscle review session. Here's what I want to remind you. We're going to ignore the rules because I'm going to draw a whole bunch of stuff here. We talked about brachioradialis. Radialis was down on the radius. Actually, it was down really low, I think. Okay. Brachioradialis, a muscle that looks something like this. I did a really terrible job drawing that. I apologize. On the exam, I might give you a drawing like this, not tell you the name of this muscle, but I would ask you to tell me what it does. So your options would be either this flexes or extends. That's the first part of your answer. The second part of your answer would be, does it move the humerus or move the radius? So let's look at this together. My origin is here in blue on the humerus. My insertion is down here on the radius. Remind me again, origin or insertion that moves? Origin or insertion that moves? Yeah, the insertion moves. Okay, so here's the first thing to think about when you approach these problems. Every time you look at these problems, start by figuring out who's moving. Whoever is the insertion is who's moving. Because see, I'll make up some more, let's make up some more bogus muscles here. I'm going to put an insertion there. We will put an insertion here. I talk about making up all these bogus muscles, and then I'm like, that's really hard. We'll do some connect the dots. Okay. Say I give you this muscle here, and I ask you, who's moving? The clavicle or the humerus? Who's moving? Yeah, humerus is green, right? Green is my insertion. So you should never tell me, if you have a question like this, do not tell me the clavicle moves. The clavicle does not move. If I give you a muscle like this, would we say that the femur moves or the fibula moves? Who's moving in this case? Yeah, exactly. My insertion is on the fibula. The fibula is going to move. Let's do... Let's do this. This is a partial view of trapezius. Would I say that trapezius moves the vertebrae or the skull? Who's moving? Yeah, so trapezius, when it contracts, actually helps to pull your head backwards because its insertion, the attachment site that moves, is actually on the back of the skull. So we're looking at the insertion point. That's half of your answer is who's moving. So make sure that you tell me whichever insertion point, whichever point that's labeled is the insertion, that's the bone that moves. Don't mix up my bones. And then the second thing we have to predict is the movement it actually does. Again, feel the parts on you. So we could do our partial trapezius here. You can put your hand on the base of your skull. You can put your other hand on the back of your spine. When you move that top hand on the base of your skull toward your spine, we would actually call that extension, because you're taking your head and moving it farther away from your chest. So we would say, I know, right? You can tell I actually did it, because I did. I'm over here in my office doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Y'all can do it too. So your head moves backwards. The angle or the distance between your jaw and your chin got bigger. Extension of the head. We can't really do it with that one. Let me draw another one here. Let's see. Let's do some funky stuff here. So there's two ways I could draw rectus abdominis. Pretend that there's a skeleton over here. I know y'all have a good enough imagination for that. I didn't have space on rectus or on the skeleton to actually do it. Say we're looking at a version of rectus or something like rectus. Dr. Aulis found it, so I'm going to call it rectus aulicis or something. So this is rectus aulicis, and this is rectus pinguinicis. I just made up muscles here. So if I show you this one, who do we say is moving? The pelvis or the rib cage? Who's moving on rectus aulicis? Ooh, we're a little bit divided. So we're looking for our insertion being the point that moves, right? And my insertion is in green. So on rectus aulicis, this one over here, the rib cage is moving. The rib cage is being pulled forward. But hey, over here on rectus pinguinicis, notice that my insertion is down here on the hip, which means that the hip bones would move. Yeah, the pelvis we would say on this one, the pelvis moves. So watch your colors. I know, I got tricky and I flipped them up on you, right? Watch your colors. It's going to be tough, except for places like when we're talking about the abdominal region. It just doesn't make sense for me to put an insertion or an origin down lower than an insertion for the most part, right? The abdominal muscles, though, are an exception. They could be flip-flopped. We could do them all over the place. So watch where those origins and insertions are. That's half the credit on the question. It's telling me who's moving. As long as you can tell me who's got the green spot, you're in good. I will tell you, Kira asked, do we need to remember that green is the insertion? We'll make sure to tell you in the question stem that it's the insertion. So you can see the colors. You don't have to memorize the colors. You're good. Yeah. I did see a question earlier in the chat asking us about leg stuff. Because remember, it was the knee joint in particular that made us all sad, right? That the knee messes things up for us. So let's go through and do some knee joint stuff, because that's the one that really, really messes us up in so many ways, right? Not only do we all have bad knees, but it also makes it harder to predict things. Okay, so let's do, oops, that's typing. Let's make up some muscles here. Give us a couple of insertions. We're going to start with a muscle that I just made up like this. So this muscle right here has an origin on the hip bones, and it has an insertion on the femur. This is a muscle that's found on the front side of the thigh. When I take this insertion and I move it toward this origin, my femur is going to go up. My femur is going to move like this. Because my femur is going from straight down to going up, it's getting closer to the pelvis up here. If I live on the front side of the thigh, I flex the leg. I flex it at the hip joint. So I'm pulling the femur, it goes up. This is a muscle that does flexion. When I'm talking about a muscle that is moving the leg, the name of the leg, the name of this part of the body is the leg. The name of this part of the body is the thigh. Just as a heads up, let's label that. The thigh is the top part. The leg is the bottom part. So when I contract this muscle, my insertion here on the front of the tibia is moving toward my femur. I'm still moving my tibia up, but this time when I move that tibia up, what ends up happening is my angle at the knee joint gets bigger. I'm adding more space to it. So you all are sitting in a chair, sitting on a couch. You can do this, and you should do this. Touch the front of your tibia, touch the top of your thigh. Now bring your tibia up to get it as close to the femur as you can. You just increase the angle at your knee joint. That's called extension. So we just did extension. This is extension of the knee. What we did up here was flexion of the hip. Flexion of the hip. Extension of the knee is when your leg comes forward. Flexion of the hip is when your femur comes forward. How do we feel about that, what we just said? I do see Kira had asked a question about whether or not we'll have lateral views. For questions that we're asking you about things like flexion or extension, I believe you will, yes. We might give you a front view and a lateral view so that you can see it two ways. Obviously, if we're talking flexion and extension, it's easiest to see from the lateral view. Yeah, so Tian asked a good question. When we are standing up, are we automatically extending the knee? Yes, that is correct. The farthest your knee will go is when you're standing up, which is why I think it's awesome that we're all sitting down, right, to see what extension looks like at your knee, because when you're sitting down, your knee has a right angle. So when we're sitting down, our knee looks like this. Our knee is partially flexed when we're sitting. When we stand up, this joint that was our knee joint goes completely straight. It goes completely extended. So when you're standing, this knee right here is completely extended. I can't pull the tibia forward anymore without breaking something, which, you know, is why we hate the knees, right? So when we're standing, we are fully extended. When we walk, we pull the tibia backwards. That's flexing the tibia backwards. Then when we take a step and put our leg back down, we're extending the tibia forward. Yeah, so Audrey said that she's wondering if the reason why the leg is confusing is because normally when we talk about flexing a muscle away from anatomical position, normally that is called flexion. That is correct, yes. That's why the knee is so ridiculous, right? Because normally when you make movement happen at a joint, when you're leaving anatomical position, you're usually flexing it. At the knee, when I move it and I pull it backwards, pulling it backwards is what makes it flexing. When I'm bringing it back to standing up, that's extension. Yeah, so the knee bends the other direction. Yeah, that's where the knee gets us in trouble. Because actually, as I was thinking about it, Audrey, when we talk about moving the knee, what we're doing is we're actually flexing it. because flexion is backwards, but that's how your knee moves, right? If we're in anatomical position, if we're standing up, the only way our knee can move is backwards. And when it's moving backwards, it's flexing. So we do still kind of follow that rule, even though the direction is what feels different, right? Usually flexion means you're pulling something forward, but in the case of the knee, because the knee is backwards, flexion actually means we're pulling it backwards. I think it's like, is it ostriches, or there's some bird that or maybe it's flamingos, actually. I think it's flamingos, that their knees are oriented the opposite direction. So they would be, you know, how we're getting angry at our knee joints. Their knee joints, it would be exactly the same all the way around. So us humans, of course, we're the ones studying these words, right? And our knee joints are backwards. Meanwhile, in the animal kingdom, they got it all right, and they're totally good. Okay, guys, I have to go on a quick tangent because I read something yesterday and I was like, I've got to share this with somebody. I was reading that because of global warming, they're starting to see more polar bears and grizzly bears that are mating. And when a polar bear and a grizzly bear mate, they're better adapted to a warmer environment. But literally, you call those bears pizzly bears. Like, that's literally their name. Here, I gotta type it for us because I read that and I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Literally, their name is pizzly bears. Is that not amazing? Like, I'm in the wrong branch of science. I don't study pizzly bears. Like, come on. So, polar bear and grizzly bear cross. That's called a pizzly bear. That's literally their name. I think it was like a light brown-ish. I had just briefly seen a picture of it. So it was pretty funny. Pizzly bears. Okay, so Kira has mentioned that their joints aren't actually different. It's just that I'm looking at a different one than I thought I was. Okay, well, there goes my hope, Kira. No, I'm joking. They do look different, at least, though. So we're looking at a different joint. It still stands that maybe if they were studying this, it might be a little easier for them. But us humans, with our bad knees in so many regards, right? They're giving us trouble. All right, we've got about 20 minutes left. What else do we want to review briefly? Are there any other things we want to do together? So Temiteo, you mentioned Lab 8. Can you give me a little more? I don't have my lab manual in front of me, so remind me of the topics that are in that. Audrey, that article, I bumped into it. It was a news article, but it was one of those things, you know how Facebook sometimes pulls news articles for you? That gives you an insight into my life. That's what Facebook thought I wanted to read. So I don't know where the article actually was because I didn't click on it. I just screenshotted the title that pizzly bears are making a comeback. Okay, you found it. Awesome. Okay, so yeah, so Temiteo, are there particular questions then that you have about the femur movement and the tibia movement? Because we kind of just talked about that with our example here. Is it particular muscles? Okay, so like semitendinosus and semimembranosus is what we're talking about? Okay. So when we're talking about semitendinosus and semimembranosus, do you remember which side of the leg those muscles are found on? Are they in the front or the back? Yeah, so they're on the back. So if we are a muscle on the back side, we'll do some sketching here. I think we actually did the activity with biceps femoris, possibly. But we'll draw something like biceps femoris back here. think it kind of attaches up there as well. Okay. I'm a muscle that attaches to the back side of the thigh. Actually, here, let's go here, because this might help us a little bit. I'm gonna draw it, this one, this leg here, okay? So here's kind of the general attachment sites for any of these muscles. They're attaching kind of right at the very base up here, and they're attaching down below, a little bit lower into the leg, so on the thigh and in the leg. When we're talking about the movements that this muscle does at the hip joint, or my fancy word for the hip joint is the coxal joint. When I contract this muscle, it's going to pull my femur toward the back side of the body. So when I'm talking about what happens to the femur, when I contract this muscle, I am pulling the femur toward the back side of the body. When I pull my femur toward the back side of the body, the amount of space that I have at my angle, so I'm going to draw that angle right here to say this is my angle at the hip joint. When I pull the femur toward the back side of the body, yeah, exactly, we are extending the hip. So if you live on the back side of the femur, you are extending the femur at the hip. We're extending the femur at the hip because we're pulling it away from the hip bones. Now at the same time, I can contract this muscle, and the bones I have down here in the leg also bend toward the back side of the body. When they bend toward the back side of the body, now we're looking at the angle that I have down here at the knee joint, When I pull on the leg and I move that toward the back side of the body, this angle, the distance between these parts, actually gets smaller. I bring these bones closer together. So when I talk about this muscle contracting, what it's doing at the knee, my angle got smaller, yeah, which means I'm actually flexing the tibia at the knee. We flex the tibia at the knee. So if you live on the back side of the femur, if you are biceps femoris, if you are semitendinosus, if you're semimembranosus, if you live back here, you extend the femur, you pull the whole leg back, or you flex the tibia, which technically still means you're moving it backwards. It's just that we're bringing it closer to the femur. We're bringing it closer to where it attached. I use a different word for it. Both times I'm going backwards. It just has to do with that angle. Is the angle getting bigger? Is the angle getting smaller? Whatever's happening with that angle tells me which of these anatomy words I use to describe the movement. Yeah, so exactly, Temiteo. It extends the femur and it flexes the tibia. Yes. Yeah, and remember the knee joint was the one that we said messed everything up. Because when we're talking about stuff in the arm, we love the arms because anybody that's anywhere on the front of the arm, excuse me, always flexes. And anybody who's on the back side of the arm always extends. The arm is super nice. The leg, not so much, because we got that knee joint mixed in the middle. So if we're pulling toward the knee, pulling backwards with the knee, we call that flexion. If we're pulling forward at the hip, we call that flexion. So the knee joint is the one time where we move backwards when we're trying to flex. Okay, so the question then is, I think we already kind of talked about biceps femoris, right? So biceps femoris, is that front side or back side? Where's biceps femoris? Oh, yeah, we got to review biceps femoris. Rectus femoris is on the front. Biceps femoris is on the back. Yeah, so here let's go to our muscle man. Muscle man is here. Biceps femoris, the friend on the outside, here on the back. Rectus femoris, the friend on the front side. So this would be one that we would say flexes the femur or extends the tibia, because it's going to pull the tibia forward. It's going to make the knee joint bigger. Flexes the femur, extends the tibia. Yeah, so yeah, when we talk about gastrocnemius, and actually when we talk about anything that's below the knee joint, it can't actually move the knee joint. It can only move the ankle. So the only movements that we asked you to predict with the ankle were the dorsiflexion and the plantar flexion. But for any of these muscles, this is actually a good point to make in general. When we talk about muscles being able to move things, they can only move across any joints that they span across. So what I mean by that is biceps femoris, it attaches up here at the hip and it attaches down here below the leg. Because it attaches across two joints, it can do a movement at the hip and it can do a movement at the knee. But if I've got little muscles, so for example, let's look here in the arm, everyone's favorite, right? Extensor digitorum. Extensor digitorum it starts just below the elbow joint and goes across the wrist. It can only do movement at the wrist joint. It doesn't go across the elbow joint, so I can't use it to move the elbow. So anything that is below a joint, any muscle that lives below a joint, it can't move at that joint. We can move any joint that is lower than us. So gastrocnemius can only move the ankle joint. All of these thigh muscles, if they start up here at the hip, which most of them do, they can move the hip and they can move the knee, as long as they go across the knee. There are some little muscles, ones that we're not learning, that only attach to the femur. Then they want to be able to move the knee because they don't cross it. But you only can move those joints that you span across. Any other last minute questions? So the question is about abduction and adduction. For these questions, we want to look at where those muscles are attaching to. So when we talk about the gluteus muscles both attach to the outside of the femur. So since they both attach to the outside of the femur, when they contract, it's going to help to pull the femur away, I believe. I need to check that. Somebody knows better than me on gluteus maximus. That's the one I'm a little uncertain about. Yeah, so I am reading. I don't think we asked you to, did we ask you to predict maximus? Okay. And I believe our prediction was it was abduct or adduct? What did we ask you to predict? Adduct. Okay, I am processing with you. I believe it has to do with this. Here, let's do our. These are my two origins on this muscle. My insertion is the same on them. When we talk about, let me get my pointer back here. When we talk about the muscle that spans like this, both of my attachment sites are lateral. Both of them are on the outside of the hip. So gluteus medius, when I take something that's lateral and I move it towards something that's lateral, that's going to make the whole femur move lateral. Gluteus medius abducts the femur. My origin for gluteus maximus is medial. It's in the middle. Whereas my insertion is out here, it's lateral. When I take my lateral insertion and move it toward a medial origin, that is adduction. So it has to do with the locations of the attachment sites. They both start out here. One of them, though, attaches on the lateral part of the body. One of them attaches more on the medial part of the body. Just like, by the way, the adductor group, that's right here, that's there medially. I can't remember, did we ask you to predict adduction on anybody else? Okay, so just arm muscle. So nobody else in the leg, though. That's what I was mainly getting at. So we did abduction, adduction. Okay, yeah, gracilis, good. Because I was going to say gracilis is a great example right here in the very middle as well. Gracilis is that long, graceful one in the middle. It's entirely found in the middle. If we're entirely in the middle, we're definitely moving toward the middle. This is going to be another one that does adduction. So adductors and gracilis do adduction. Gluteus maximus on the backside does adduction. Gluteus medius and then tensor fascia latae, that little weird one that we had. So gluteus medius and tensor fascia latae, both of them completely on the outside. Those are going to be ones that do abduction because they're both lateral. I think we talked about this before, and I'll mention it one more time for us. Those movement rules are a good idea for flashcards. But at this point, right, we're really close to the exam. So these are like rudimentary, basic flashcards that we're making. So front side of the flashcard says muscles on the outer thigh do what? The lateral side of the thigh do what? Backside, it says abduct the femur. New card. Front side says muscles on the medial side of the thigh do what to the femur? Backside says adducts. You can do that with all of those muscle movement rules. The goal of the rules is so that you don't go through and memorize the deltoid muscle flexes and abducts. And I mean, if you want to, you can, but the biceps flexes, you can go through and measure or memorize them however seems best to you. I think just learning those rules is a better option. But again, whatever floats your boat. At this point, we're in like hardcore study mode, right? Whatever works for you. Yeah, so Timmy Tay was asking about tensor fascia latae, I presume. And Kira's right. That's that one that's also out here lateral. So that's going to be another abductor out here lateral. All right, well, I think I'm going to shut off the recording. A quick mention, I know I saw Audrey say something about this. They are predicting weather to move through the area tonight. Tonight would not be the best time if there are storms in your area. Tonight would not be a great time to try to take the exam. Please try to not be in proctorio during the exam, just because I would hate for the power to go out on you in the middle. It's not that I'm not going to work with you and make something happen. It's just I would hate that for you to be halfway through your exam and have to start over. So probably wait on the weather. Obviously, most of us were talking about doing the exam tomorrow anyway. So just be mindful of that. Stay safe. I have office hours tomorrow if you have any last minute questions you want to stop by for. Otherwise, good luck with wrapping up the exam studying. Good luck with that exam, and I hope to see you on Wednesday.